Hi, I'm the Grow Boss. I write the Grow Book and Equipment Guide, and in this video, we're going to go over how to vent your tents because there seems to be a lot of confusion about when, why, and how to do it. Okay, so the number one question you guys ask me about venting is, how big a fan should I buy?
And how big a filter do I need? And should I do a sealed garden? And can I blow through the filter? Or do I have to suck through it? And what about adding CO2? And what about an air conditioner? And what about heat?
Okay, that was like 3 questions, but I think you get my point. There is a lot of confusion when it comes to venting.
That's why throughout the video, not only will we be going over tips and tricks about venting, adding CO2, and air conditioners, but we are also going to use a smoke machine and thermal scanner to scientifically test the effectiveness of the different adapters and the temperature of the hoods and the glass and the ducting. That way we can figure out once and for all what really works best, so you will finally buy my book instead of all those other ones.
So before we go on, you should know this is the long video that covers everything you need to know about venting and cooling and adding CO2 like this. But there's also a bunch of shorter videos that cover the individual topics too. For instance,
how to set up an AC in your garden so you're not just venting all that electricity you spent on cold air. How much filter you really need, and that's important because I can smell an eighth in your pocket when you come in my store. And how much light you really need, because all light is heat, and the number one problem that calls my helpline is always too much light. We are also going to go over the truth about sealed gardens, and you won't believe what I'm going to show you about that. And let's not forget about CO2. We'll go over how to add it so you don't waste it by venting it. And finally, we are going to go over how to vent a 1, 2, and 3 light rotation using kind LEDs, Nickel City Bad Boy T5s, and the standard hoods we're all used to. And I'm also going to show you how to do all that with light rail light movers too, so you can get a visual on how it all goes together.
So let's start by going over how to vent small 2x4 tents like this with a kind LED on a light rail light mover and a Nickel City Bad Boy T5.
There is one more thing I want you to know before we get started. All the examples I use in this video are going to be intense, and that's because it's easier for me to explain the basics of venting when you can see what's happening in a controlled space. I promise though, by the end of the video, I'll go over exhausting a room in your house, and trust me, you're going to want to watch that part because I have some information you need to know, especially if you're using an AC to cool your garden or are adding CO2.
So, just sit back, smoke a bowl or several bowls, and let me know what you think about the video in the comments section. And if you like it, subscribe to the channel and recommend it to a friend.
All right, these are the most basic events, and you can see basically we have 3 options to choose from. We can put the Vortex fan filter inside the tent on the floor, where it filters the same air over and over, but does not actually exhaust any air. And as you can see, even the smallest of fan filter setups takes up a lot of space in a small tent like this. And you usually need all the space you can get.
Or you could put the fan filter on the roof like this. But again, in a little tent that's easily filled up with one plant, like in my trellis video, you can easily see how your kind LED on a light rail light mover would run out of space because I had to push it against the back wall to fit the fan filter in here. And even though these are smaller tents, at some point you're going to have to vent, if not for the heat, for the fresh air. So your third option is to run some thermal flow ducting up and out the port like this. Because there's clearly not enough room in there for the fan filter and your lights and the plants. And if you're going to leave your tent door open to deal with the heat, then you might as well put the fan filter outside the tent, right? And I know you're trying to be stealthy when you grow in tents like these, but I just want you to understand, the moment you close this door and turn on that fan,
there is absolutely nothing stealthy about a screaming loud black tent with the sides sucked in like this in your living room.
And even if the manufacturers made this thing look like a closet or a toolbox or something that belonged in your house, there is nothing stealthy about a big black tent like this in your living room.
So in a little tent like this, you're probably going to vent like this with a vortex fan filter on the outside of the tent and some thermoflow going into it, or with the fan filter on top of it like this. And once you're at the point where you're not trying to cram the fan filter into the tent, you might as well upgrade to a real sized filter like one of these from Vortex. And I'll show you why later in the video, but for now, all you need to know is that the bigger the filter, the slower the air passes through it, and the better it filters the scent molecules out.
And because T5 lights and LED lighting don't have a flange like this to attach the ducting to, all we can do for lights like these is just sort of hang the thermoflow in the tent. And if you are going to add CO2, and I always suggest that you add CO2 because CO2 gets you more weight, you would add it here amongst the canopy of the plants. Unless you were venting like this, then you would hang it as far away from the vent source as possible, so it would have to travel up and through the plants, giving them the best chance of absorbing it. Now, this is a bottle of TNB CO2, and just like a 20-pound CO2 tank, this will last about 2 weeks. And I love this stuff for the home gardener because of just how easy it is to use. But we'll get more into CO2 tanks and Sentinel monitor controllers later in the video.
Before we go on though, let me show you what I mean about airflow in these tents. Check that out. And that's why I tell you all you have to do is get the CO2 in there, and the plants will take care of the rest. That's also why I always tell you a bigger fan and venting more air isn't going to help anything. In fact, venting more air is usually the opposite of what you want. But we'll get into that later in the video.
And now let me show you how to vent 2 tents. And the best thing about this is there's absolutely no more equipment to buy. I mean, sure, you have to buy a second tent and a second light and this one, but don't focus on that. And instead, focus on this. When you vent 2 tents, you don't have to buy a second fan filter. All you do is take the line, put it on the fan, add the thermoflow back to this side, add a second piece of thermoflow over to this tent, and bam! 2 tents vented with almost nothing else to buy. Okay, 2 more things before we go on, and the first is this. Because these tents are so small, your house AC will be able to absorb any heat coming off a light that belongs in one of these tents. So we're going to save the air conditioner talk for later in the video.
And number 2, if your house AC can handle the heat from a 2-light rotation, it can always handle the heat from a 3-light rotation like this, because your 2 flower lights will never be on at the same time, which means the 3-light rotation never gets hotter than a 2-light rotation. And if you want more information about rotations, you can watch my Nickel City 1, 2, and 3-light rotation video, or you can watch my videos on how much light you really need, or on how much filter you really need, or how to add an air conditioner to your garden here on YouTube, or you can catch all that and more on thehydrochannel.com. Now, let's get back to venting the 3-light rotation.
With the 3-light rotation, and this is always where you want to be, you're either going to have to buy another fan filter for the second flower tent, and even if you take the ducting from the veg tent and move it into the second flower tent, you're still either going to need to buy another fan filter for the veg tent, or we're going to have to figure out a way to use this one fan filter to do all 3 now. It's actually super easy. Just get a second 666Y like this, attach it to one side of the first Y, run thermoflow from these two ports to the two flower tents, and from this port to the veg tent, and you're good. But before you say it, I already know, but then the flower tents will be getting less venting than the veg tent. And you would be right, but you only have two choices. Either let it go, because in a 3-light rotation, only 2 lights will ever be on at the same time, and your house AC is more than sufficient to deal with that heat, or you can get a 6-to-4 reducer for this port, which will slow the air down, but now you're going to need a bag of 4-inch thermoflow too.
And even though I always tell you to buy thermoflow, because it's guaranteed to never blow out, and even though the cheap overseas shit is awful, neither one of us wants to buy 2 bags of it if we don't have to. So, if you do the reducer thing, just slip the 6-inch ducting over it like this, tape it down, and let it go. If you can.
Or you're going to have to make your own plenum like this by cutting 4 matching holes in a box, put the bottom hole on the fan, and run thermoflow from the other 3 ports out to your tents.
And if for whatever reason you still need to balance the flow between ports even more precisely, or you need to increase the flow to any one port because the ducting has further to travel, you can always cover the ports with aluminum foil like this, then just cut X's into them like this, with the biggest X in whichever port you want to flow the most air. And while I make fun of builders that worry about all this, you should know that the only reason I know all these tips and tricks is because I suffer from OCD too. Hi, I'm the Grow Boss. I have optimal crop disease. I am a builder and a lifetime member of Group 85.
Personally though, I just use a couple of Ys like this and let it go, because airflow doesn't matter as much as you think, and I'll prove it to you later in the video. Of course, the rules for adding CO2 always stay the same regardless of tent size. Rule number 1, soon as you turn a light on, you should always be adding CO2, because in the photosynthesis equation, plants use light for energy to combine water and CO2. So unless you're going to overwater or move your light closer, the only thing left is CO2. Rule number 2, if you are recirculating the air over and over, then it doesn't matter where in the tent you add the CO2 because it won't be vented.
And rule number 3, if you are venting, make sure to keep the CO2 on the opposite side of the tent, so the plants are between the CO2 source and the exhaust, so they get their best chance at absorbing the CO2 as it passes through them, just like you see here with the smoke.
Before we go on to the bigger tents though, let me show you one of my customers' favorite setups. And it's a Nickel City T5 in veg like this, and it's a kind K5 LED 750 on a light rail light mover and flower like this. And they like it so much because this is dimmable. You can turn 400 watts down to 200 watts, veg your plants for a couple weeks, turn it up to 400 watts, and really puff them up. Transfer them over here to flower, and here's a K750 dimmed down to 50%. Then after a few weeks in flower, you just turn up the LED as your plants get bigger. It even comes with a remote. And now that's at 100%. That's why my customers like this rotation. It gets them the awesomeness of LED flowers. It gets them the awesome veg light for T5 with way less heat. Of course, we would vent this setup the same way we'd vent any 2-light rotation. We would suck from the tents through some thermoflow ducting, through a vortex fan, into a vortex filter, and we would blow the heat out into the room. Because with these wattage lights, your house AC is more than capable of dealing with the heat. And I'll show you more about that later too.
If you got the OCD though, and you wanted to slow the veg side airflow down, remember, you could do the aluminum foil trick, or you could use a 6-to-4 reducer and just slip the 6-inch thermoflow over it like this. Either way, you won't have to buy 2 bags of ducting. All right, let's veg some bigger tents now.